Okay, then we can officially start. So hello everyone again. Welcome to our second Belgrade Legal Theory meeting in this summer semester 2024. It is my great pleasure to announce that our speaker is Piotr Bystranowski, and that the topic of today's lecture is self-absorbed yet interesting, a study on general jurisprudence. And I will just quickly introduce him, and then I will leave the floor to him. So he is a senior researcher fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Research on Collective Goods, as well as a researcher at the Interdisciplinary Centre for Ethics at the Jagiellonian University. He specialized in application of experimental and computational methods in law and philosophy. His recent research includes topics in theory of criminalization, judicial decision-making, and legal interpretation. He currently leads a 4-year project on experimental philosophy of legal ignorance. And without any further ado, Piotr, the floor is yours. We are excited to hear the lecture.
Thank you so much, Mila, and hello everyone. I'm very excited to present this paper to this specific audience. When Mila invited me some weeks ago to present something at the seminar, I immediately knew it was going to be this project, because as you will see in a moment, it is a study on a meta-scientific study on legal philosophy, and ideally it would be authored or co-authored by somebody who is well read in legal philosophy. Unfortunately, it's single-authored by myself, and my knowledge of legal philosophy is very specialized and fragmented. Unlike you guys, Belgrade people, you read everything, and your, so to speak, wide knowledge of legal philosophy is very much well known. So whatever feedback I receive from you today, I'm sure it would be very valuable to this project. And another thing to mention is that the timing is really good for this presentation, because exactly 1 week ago, this paper got rejected at the Oxford Journal of Legal Studies with a very nice email from the editor. She definitely had read the paper carefully, and she had a lot of opinions about it, but not univocally favorable opinions, I'm afraid. But I'm mentioning that only for you to know that I haven't resubmitted it anywhere yet, so any kind of suggestions is welcome. But yeah, moving on. Moving on. This is a study on general jurisprudence, and I'm sure you know that the definition of general jurisprudence is a controversial matter. It's not really clear what body of scholarship this term refers to, but I'm in this lucky situation that I can start this project without stipulating any detailed definition of general jurisprudence. It's fine for now to state it in very general terms. Like, general jurisprudence is let's say the part of legal philosophy dealing with the most abstract general questions and issues, philosophical issues about law. But independently of how you exactly understand general jurisprudence, you probably know that general jurisprudence has been subject to a lot of criticism over the last two or three decades. I'm not going to show you all the examples, but I don't know, probably most of you are familiar with this essay by David Enoch. Is general jurisprudence interesting? For those of you who are not familiar with it, let me spoil it for you. The answer is no, general jurisprudence is not interesting. And there are many other examples. I just listed 3 here, but of course there are many other examples of criticism that general jurisprudence faces. That it's basically in the state of stagnation. That it doesn't show any progress, whatever progress would mean in philosophy. That it's so fixated on a bunch of decades-long debates, and that it has basically reached some sort of dead end. But in any case, I think that a fair share of those criticisms can be grouped in 2 broad classes. And the first class would be associated with the statement that general jurisprudence is not interested in some relevant other discourses. So it doesn't take an inspiration or input from some other discourses that could be largely relevant to it. So, for example, there is this relatively well-known paper by David Planck and Scott Shapiro saying that general jurisprudence is a special case of metaethics. And there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in metaethics, but people doing general jurisprudence in general don't read metaethics. Or you have, I don't know, Martin Krieger or Brenta Manaha arguing that there is a lot of relevant input to general jurisprudence in the social theory, but again, people in general jurisprudence don't take anything from the social theory. So this is one way of arguing to this effect, that general jurisprudence doesn't engage with those more general discourses in philosophy or in social sciences. But it is also possible to argue that people in general jurisprudence basically are not interested in law either. That there are so many interesting philosophical problems that emerge in specific areas of legal scholarship that many more specialized legal philosophers discuss. But people in general jurisprudence are not even, perhaps are not even aware of those controversies. Okay, so that's one class. The other class is associated with that statement that general jurisprudence is not interesting, that it doesn't generate knowledge that would be useful or somehow interesting to other areas of scholarship, say to legal scholarship. So general jurisprudence lacks impact on first-order controversies in specific areas of law. And again, I can here refer to David Enoch to his well-known essay in which he says, it's not like in meta-ethics. Your position in meta-ethics often matters for your position in normative ethics, but it's not like this in law. Like your position in general jurisprudence hardly ever has any impact on your position in specific legal controversies. So that was just a very quick overview of this, let's say, debate. But both classes of criticism, in my opinion, they boil down to stating that general jurisprudence is isolated from other areas of scholarship. And my question is there a way to to measure this isolation, to get some objective, systematic evidence of the relative isolation of general jurisprudence from other areas of scholarship? And to my mind, the best kind of evidence we can hope for is citation analysis, citation data. So this is what I want to do in this project. I want to first identify a collection of texts in general jurisprudence within a broader class of texts in legal philosophy. And after I have those two sets identified, I can analyze citation flow. And if indeed general jurisprudence is not interested in relevant discourses, then this would lead to the prediction that texts in general jurisprudence refer to other discourses less than texts in other areas of legal philosophy. And if general jurisprudence is not interesting, this leads to the prediction that texts in general jurisprudence are cited less than texts in other areas of legal philosophy. And what I'm proposing is not actually new in philosophy. I think it's relatively new in legal scholarship. I'm not aware of much research, systematic research of citation patterns within legal scholarship, as opposed to case law, where, of course, there's a lot of empirical work on citation in case law, but not in legal scholarship. But there has been quite a lot of research in this spirit in philosophy. So I give you just 3 examples, that there are many, many more, of using citation networks or co-authorship networks to say something interesting about philosophical scholarship. Most frequently to say something about the interaction between philosophy and the outside world, philosophy and other areas of scholarship too. So, for example, this paper that you can see in the top left corner. This is something very relevant to this project. Those 2 guys, basically, their starting point is their prediction that the core of philosophy, which is defined by some as philosophy of language, epistemology, mind, and metaphysics, that this is area of philosophy that enjoys the largest prestige in philosophy. But at the same time, it is most isolated from the outside world. It doesn't interact with scholarship outside philosophy, unlike some more peripheral areas of philosophy, like philosophy of science, which is, I don't know, some would say not as prestigious as metaphysics or philosophy of language, but it has much more impact because it is read by non-philosophers. So this suggests that maybe we can observe something, indeed something parallel in legal philosophy, that general jurisprudence perhaps is the most prestigious part of legal philosophy, but at the same time is the part that is relatively most isolated from the outside world, if you will. Okay, so this project progresses in two stages. The first stage is based on co-citation analysis. And what is a co-citation? Co-citation is a situation in which two papers are co-cited if they are both on a reference list of some third article. And it has been argued in bibliometric studies for decades now, since the 60s or 70s, that the relation of co-citation tells us something interesting about two papers that are co-cited, especially if they are co-cited multiple times. It tells us if they are cited jointly, it says that probably they are on a similar topic, probably they are similar in some relevant ways, probably they are part of the same area of research, probably their authors belong to the same epistemic community. So I used co-citation analysis to construct a collection of central texts in legal philosophy. And then also, through co-citation analysis, I identified distinct communities through modularity analysis. Probably some of you are not familiar with this vocabulary, but I will explain it shortly. And hopefully, as an effect of this modularity analysis, we will observe a community corresponding to general jurisprudence. And maybe there is something interesting to be said about general jurisprudence by analyzing the structure of the resulting network. The second stage is citation analysis. So unlike co-citation, citation is simply a situation in which one paper cites another paper. And here I will test those two hypotheses that I have already mentioned. Does general jurisprudence cite less than other communities in legal philosophy? In legal philosophy, is general jurisprudence cited less than other communities in legal philosophy? All right, so far so good. Let me say a few words about the data I use. So, like, of course, in any kind of citation or co-citation analysis, your database is one of the most important factors. And in this case, I opted for a free and open Alex database, and not some proprietary database like Claribet's Web of Science. Why was that? I thought that this open Alex database would be better for my purposes because it has a wider coverage of journals, and it includes books, which is very relevant from the point of view of any study on legal philosophy. Why? Because so much of legal philosophy has happened in journals that are not indexed in Web of Science. To give you just one example, most American student-run law reviews are not indexed on Web of Science, and so much of, as you know, important legal philosophy has happened there. And also, books are still, as we will see later, are still so important in legal philosophy, unlike in the sciences, for example. So the fact that OpenAlex includes books, unlike, let's say again, Web of Science, it was a huge advantage. It has one very important disadvantage that I will discuss in more detail later. It is not exactly complete. So, like, Web of Science provides you a narrower set of outlets, but for those outlets, the data are of good quality. They're more or less complete. It's not exactly the case with OpenAlex, unfortunately. And then in the final stages of this study, I will use the NSF classification of journals to distinct disciplines of science to show you the flow of citations from or to different disciplines of science to or from legal philosophy. So how I constructed this collection of the core of legal philosophy. I think I don't have time to go into details. It is described in more details in the paper. But just let me gloss over it quickly. So I started with 18 specialist journals that publish work primarily or exclusively in legal philosophy, in English and in other languages. Actually, most of this set of 18 journals were journals published in non-Anglophone countries. All those items had to be cited at least once. This resulted in over 4,000 texts, but of course this included only papers published in those 18 journals, while, as I said, most legal philosophy is highly dispersed, so it can be published in other journals, in books, and so on. So then I expanded that dataset in 2 steps. First, I included other items that cite at least 5 items included in that specialist journal collection. And then I added what I call the classics collection. So I added items that were cited at least 6 times in the previous 2 collections. By items in the previous 2 collections. So this resulted in over 6,000 texts. But of course, those were all sorts of things, and I wanted something like really solid and connected to each other. So I included in my final analysis only items from those 6,000 that were co-cited with at least 6 other items in that collection, that were co-cited at least 6 times with at least 2 other items in that collection. It sounds complicated, but it's rather simple when you think about it. But anyway, this resulted in 720 notes, so 720 articles included in the graph. And then I excluded some small components. You can discuss it in more detail later if you wish. The bottom line is, in the end, I have 713 texts, which you can see, I hope, here. Yes, that's the network. So each node, each circle in this graph represents 1 text, and nodes, dots, are connected if they are co-cited at least 6 times by those edges, as it is called in network analysis. And edges are, the thicker they are, it means the more times they are co-cited with each other. So yeah, this is 613 items, but you can see that they are colored in some different ways. Why is that? Because I ran some community detection algorithm on it. This is one of the basic techniques in network analysis. What is a community? In network analysis, it is a set of nodes that are better connected to each other than they are connected to the rest of the graph. And in the context of co-citation analysis, a community should represent a distinct body of research. So in this case, a different specific research area within legal philosophy. So I ran this standard community detection algorithm, Louvain algorithm, with default parameters, and it resulted in 21 communities. Some of those communities were very large. Some of those communities were really small, consisting of just a few of papers. So the smallest community that I didn't interpret them, but I interpreted 17 communities, which were above some minimal threshold, or which I don't remember, but let's say 10 articles. And what interpretation means? It basically means labeling those communities by labels that correspond to some actual areas of research in legal philosophy, or at least so I hope. And how this process proceeded? Well, I used 2 tools. First, for each community, I listed 10 most central texts to that community as measured by eigenvector centrality, which is a measure that I will explain in more detail later, and also by 10 words that were most characteristic to the titles and abstracts of text in that community. Characteristic as measured by a standard measure in natural language processing, TF-IDF, term frequency, inverse document frequency, which basically measures how characteristic a given term is to a given subset of some corpus. So what can we see for this largest community that I labeled ultimately general jurisprudence? That the central texts to it are texts by Hart, Dworkin, Ras, Fuller, Finis, and John Austin. So mostly positivists and the most notorious or well-known critics of positivism. And indeed, in the list of most characteristic terms, you can see positivism, some surnames as Dworkin, Hart, Ras, positivist. So you might think that it simply refers to positivism or Hart-Dworkin debate or positivism and its critics, but actually you can see on the list of most characteristic terms that there are some more general terms that you would associate it with some very fundamental reflection on law, as judge, theory, rule, jurisprudence, interpretation. That's why I decided that this community refers to the entire general jurisprudence. So just to give you two more examples, there's this second largest cluster, which I called law and political theory. And here you can see some, as the most central, some texts from, I would say, mostly political philosophers. But it's political philosophy that is at the intersection with legal philosophy. And also in the list of most characteristic terms, you can see terms that would be analyzed by political philosophers, but which are also highly relevant, I would argue, from the point of view of legal philosophy. And the third largest, I called punishment. And here I have no doubts, like the entire list are texts about the theory of punishment, and also the vocabulary is very much associated with theories of punishment. And I could continue, of course, through this list of 19 interpreted communities, but I won't do it because we don't have time. But this is arguably, of course, a very subjective process, and a process that is subject to criticism. So if any of you ends up reading the entire paper, I would be very grateful to share your thoughts on that, because the appendix contains this process for all, these two tools for all the communities. But anyway, is there something interesting to be said about this, this network? First, it's difficult to delineate legal philosophy. As I said, this cluster, law and political theory, contains a lot of stuff that is more readily classified as political theory. Somewhat similar responsibilities, say. It contains much stuff that is more associated with moral philosophy. Is it surprising? I mean, nobody would expect, I think, that it's easy to delineate legal philosophy, and that quite often it overlaps with other areas of practical philosophy. But at the same time, most of the communities are purely in legal philosophy, and most importantly, general jurisprudence. What I label as general jurisprudence, it contains basically only texts that are uncontroversially within legal philosophy. Something about this cluster, this largest cluster, general jurisprudence. Some nice things. It is large, it is well connected, it is very ecumenical. So, as I said, there is not just positivism. There are many others. There are natural lawyers. There are anti-positivists. There is Alexis. There is critical legal studies. There is some law and economics. So this is nice. This means that general jurisprudence is not balkanized, if I can use this adjective. It's not that it is divided across some lines between schools that argue with each other. No, actually, this is a broad church, and people seem to be interacting with each other, even if they are divided by some perspectives. And the same thing applies to the entire graph. It is defined more by the object of interest rather than by differing perspective, methodological or whatnot. So this is quite nice. Now let me move to a centrality analysis, and this is also an important step in any network analysis, to measure nodes that are central in some sense to a given network. And there are many mathematical tools to do exactly that. Here I use two: eigenvector centrality, which basically says that important nodes are the ones that are well connected to other important nodes, and betweenness centrality, which says that important nodes are those which are middlemen, which connect in a way different areas of the graph. And really briefly, as you can see here, when we focus on eigenvector centrality, basically the most central papers are all from general jurisprudence, and the concept of law is by far the most central text in the entire graph. It's not exactly like this in the case of betweenness centrality. The concept of law is again at the top, but some other communities pop up. But in any way, general jurisprudence is the most central, the most prestigious, if you will, community, both as measured by mean eigenvector centrality and mean betweenness centrality. So indeed, general jurisprudence is central. But now, let me tell you an interesting thing, I hope. Namely, I fit a linear model predicting eigenvector centrality of given node on the basis of its the community it belongs to, whether it's general jurisprudence or not, its publication type, whether it's a book or, let's say, some other type, journal article, and the year of its publication. And all of those variables are significant predictors of eigenvector centrality. But let me show you some interesting interactions. So here, as you can see, both for general jurisprudence and for other communities, the older a given text is, the more central, eigenvector central it is. But this trend is rather weak for other communities. It's super strong for general jurisprudence. That's a massive difference. So in general jurisprudence, it really matters if you're an old text from the 60s. If you're from the 60s and you're in general jurisprudence, you are super prestigious. If you are a 2020 paper in general jurisprudence, you're basically as little important as other publications from the same time in legal philosophy. So this premium for old text in general jurisprudence is really, really striking. And somewhat similarly for books versus other types of publications. Both in general jurisprudence and in other communities, books are more prestigious in legal philosophy, it seems, than journal articles. But this trend for legal philosophy is massive. Well, for general jurisprudence, I'm sorry, it's massive. So the bottom line is, it seems indeed that general jurisprudence is very prestigious within legal philosophy, but this prestige appears to be driven primarily by old books, right? Old books in general jurisprudence are very central, and this drives the centrality of the entire area. Okay, I've been talking for almost 25 minutes, and only now I'm moving to the main part, but I will try to be really brief. So this is about citation flows. And I divide it into two parts: citations within the graph. So citations from some communities in the graph to other communities in the graph, and then I will move to citations from outside or to outside world. So when we focus on this table shows you the mean number of citations from other communities to a given community, compared with the total number of citations from the graph from other communities and from the community itself to it. So as you can see, a typical paper in general jurisprudence is cited over one time by other communities and 2 times in total, which means that the majority of citations to general jurisprudence come from other communities in legal philosophy. What it means? Legal philosophers seem to read general jurisprudence, they cite general jurisprudence relatively frequently. But then, what people in general jurisprudence cite? Well, basically, a typical paper in general jurisprudence cites less than one other paper from this network, while it cites 4.4 papers from the entire network. So it means that, like, basically only 16% of citations to legal philosophy from general jurisprudence go to other areas of legal philosophy that general jurisprudence itself. If a paper in general jurisprudence cites legal philosophy, with sort of 84% chance, it refers to general jurisprudence. So it seems that indeed general jurisprudence is self-absorbed. Okay, let me skip this. And the final 2 bits is citations from or to outside the graph. So from or to papers that are not in this core of legal philosophy. I apologize for this table. I know it looks terrible and it's big, but of course, only this row interests us for now. So these are the number of citations that a typical paper in a given community receives from different areas, different disciplines. So a typical paper in general jurisprudence will be cited 2 times by journals classified as philosophy in this NSF classification that I mentioned in the beginning, and 4 times by journals classified as law. Is it a lot? Not really. It gives general jurisprudence the 11th place for citations from philosophy. So it seems that general jurisprudence is particularly unlikely to be cited by philosophers. And it gives 5th place for citations from law. So general jurisprudence is relatively likely to be cited by legal scholars, but there are some communities that are better at that. And next to none citations from other disciplines. So basically nobody outside philosophy and law is interested in general jurisprudence, which is not the same for at least some other communities. And I don't, and something you need to trust me, because I'm not going to present it in more detail, is that citations to general jurisprudence are consistently older than for other communities. What is an age of citation? The difference between the year of publication of the citing article and the age of publication of the cited article. So the older the citation is, it means that the citing article cites It's an article that is relatively old at the moment of publication. And it seems that people who cite general jurisprudence focus on particularly old pieces, which is consistent with what I have already said earlier, the same pattern. Okay, and the final table, what different communities cite. And you can see that general jurisprudence, a typical paper would cite one paper from a journal classified as philosophy and one paper from a journal classified as law, and nothing else. And this means that basically for both philosophy and law, general jurisprudence is in the bottom half of the table. It is unlikely to cite, relatively unlikely to cite philosophy and relatively unlikely to cite law. And as I have already said, it is very much unlikely to cite anything else. Right, so it's almost 30 minutes, so let me conclude. What kind of picture of general jurisprudence this study pictures? There are some nice things about general jurisprudence. This is big. It is a broad church. It is ecumenical. As I said, many different approaches seem to be present in it and are given voice in a way, are interacting with other approaches. One thing that is not so great is that at least this network presents general jurisprudence as very much Anglophone-centric. There are hardly non-Anglophone philosophers present. And even when they are present, like, I don't know, Kelsen or Alexis present, they are present through translations to English. But as I hopefully say in the limitation part, it's hard to determine whether it's a reflection on some actual phenomenon in the world or rather an artificial use. Furthermore, as I said, general jurisprudence seems indeed to be fixated. Is general jurisprudence interested in other discourses? No, it's not. Like, it's quite solid. I think I offer quite solid evidence that there is limited interest in general jurisprudence in the rest of legal philosophy, in law, or in philosophy, and no interest in other disciplines, judging from the citation flows. Is it interesting for others? Here the answer is just slightly more complicated, because indeed we see that general jurisprudence seems to be read by the rest of legal philosophy. And it receives some limited interest from law and from philosophy, and basically no interest from other disciplines. There are some limitations, but as I've already been talking for more than 30 minutes, perhaps we can leave it for the discussion. Let me just say that throughout this presentation, I referred to the paper many times, and indeed the preprint is available on ResearchGate. You can find it easily there, or you can just scan this QR code to get there. And yeah, any kind of feedback is very much welcome. Thank you so much, and I will shut up now. Thanks.
Thank you, Piotr, for this very interesting presentation. Since in our faculty we are dealing with philosophy of law, but I'm also working in the field of sociology of law. Anna is dealing with human rights. I think that there's something for each of us in your presentation. And how general jurisprudence is connected to our field. So now is the time for questions. Do we have any? Or I can start with mine. Okay. Jules, you're waving? Or you're not waving? Okay. So Piotr, my first question would be regarding the methodology. And as you described in the last slide, so you used OpenAlex database. So
right.
Would you think that the results would be different if you used something else? For example, ResearchGate, which is not open, or academia, which is open. So, and do you think in later stages to like compare the results done with this database with other databases?
Right, no, definitely. The kind of data you use can be expected to have some impact. And you're absolutely right that ideally this would compare results obtained from different databases. But there isn't much choice. So like the basic choice for me was between Web of Science and this open Alex thing that I ultimately used. And as I might have mentioned, my main reservation about those proprietary databases is that they are not open, of course, which is a huge limitation for reproducibility. And from the open science perspective. But what was really important for me was the breadth of coverage. So it suggests some repositories. I think the problem with repositories would be that it's by their main limitation is that they are limited in time, because like they mostly include items that have been posted there in the past, I don't know, bunch of years.
Recently, yeah.
Or 15 years. Of course, it could still be interesting, and it could still be some corroboration of these results, because arguably we can still see what older texts are cited by those items. So we would have access to a limited set of citing items, but it could serve as some validity check. So yeah, basically I agree that ideally I would compare some different sources, but as this is a rather labor-intensive exercise, and basically I started doing it before the advent of ChatGPT, so it required quite a lot of coding. Perhaps today it would be easier. In the end, I focused on one data set. But yeah, you asked if I had any specific predictions. I don't know. My hope is that the basic patterns are robust enough that they would be to some degree corroborated by other data. But yeah, this is just my hope based on the robustness of these results.
Yeah, and so if I understood correctly, your like the biggest conclusion that general jurisprudence cites books and old books, so old books more often than other areas of law.
No, not exactly. Sorry. So perhaps I wasn't clear enough on that. It's not about what general jurisprudence cites. It's about what parts of general jurisprudence are particularly prestigious as measured by some centrality measures. So it's basically about the way, let's say, the concept of law is cited by general jurisprudence, perhaps too, but also by others. So it's not exactly about focused on what general jurisprudence cites, but what is cited that belong, and how is cited what belongs to general jurisprudence.
Yes, and so it's more present in that field than in other fields. So do you have like any idea why it's that, like why we tend to be like, so old books are more prestigious?
Mm-hmm.
So in comparing to other field, why do you have any idea why is that?
So I have only my speculation, but I think I can concur with some critics of general jurisprudence that indeed the stuff that general jurisprudence has produced that other people find interesting are those old books. It's hard, it's working, it's fuller, is whatnot. And whatever happened in general jurisprudence afterwards is increasingly specialized and increasingly interesting only to insiders. So that is my favorite interpretation. I'm not sure if it's the correct one, but yeah, like general jurisprudence discourse, the general jurisprudence discourse has been growing increasingly specialized and accessible only to a rather limited number of people. So I imagine that a person from other areas of legal philosophy, or perhaps just some legal scholar that feels the need to familiarize themselves with some legal philosophy, still finds Hart extremely accessible, because as we know, Hart is extremely accessible to working too, I think, and some other those guys. While a typical paper in general jurisprudence published these days, I don't want to generalize, but perhaps a typical paper is not that accessible to outsiders, and it ends up being read only by people from within the same rather specialized community. But of course, I would be very interested to hear alternative interpretations if you have
any. For now, I can read the Sava's questions, which are in chat. I don't know if you see them.
I saw them for a moment. Let me check.
Yes, I can read it also. So Sava says sorry because he's writing like this, because he has problems with WebEx.
No worries.
And he has 3 questions.
Yeah.
So he has, first one is also methodological. Do you offer a precise distinction between general jurisprudence and other parts of legal philosophy in the paper? Because it seems to me that it would be necessary for such a research.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I can read each one and then you can answer.
Okay. So, right. The question is whether so as I said, my idea was to stipulate as little as possible from the outside, from the start of the study, and let it be as much data-driven as possible. So, as I understand Saba's question, is whether I had any pre-existing assumptions on how I would theoretically delineate general jurisprudence from other areas of legal philosophy. And this is indeed something that I hadn't really considered before collecting the data. And this clustering basically is fully data-driven, and then whatever comes after it is my interpretation of the partition provided by the community detection algorithm. So yeah, I mean, again, I think this is very much open to criticism, my interpretation of these clusters, but I think that the general approach makes sense, to make as little assumptions about what general jurisprudence is and how we can define the differences between it and other areas of legal philosophy, and let the data speak. Of course, we always come with some assumptions, and the interpretative process is driven by some assumptions that we already had. But again, as I said, I'm very open to any criticism of the specific interpretation that I propose of those clusters. But to answer Saba's question, I didn't explicitly stipulate any fine line that would theoretically distinguish general jurisprudence from other related discourses in legal philosophy.
Yes, the second question is about the older books being more relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the consequences of that fact, which is kind of already answered, or you have something to add?
What are the consequences of this fact? So, yeah, perhaps I could add something on that, although I don't draw any prescriptive implications from that. This is purely descriptive study. I just was interested to check whether those criticisms of general jurisprudence are valid. And as I show, people who criticize general jurisprudence from the perspective that I mentioned in the beginning of this study, yeah, definitely they have some reason to criticize it along those lines. If there is any solution to be proposed, or what should be done, this I'm fairly agnostic about. All those guys probably that criticize general jurisprudence have some thoughts about it, but I don't want to propose it. I'm extremely sorry, but I need to open the door. I'm back in 10 seconds.
He definitely run away.
He's back.
I am back. Yeah, the third question from Sava. I'm ready. Sorry for
that. So the third question is regarding so what could be the general conclusions inferred from your results? Do you think anything relevant about the value of general jurisprudence should be drawn from this? And something as an add up, do you think that good way of improving general jurisprudence or making it more interesting for other disciplines? Could be, I don't know, naturalization proposed by Brian Leiter, or for example, what is doing Brian Tamanaha with in his work, or experimental jurisprudence, which is your field. So do you have any like suggestions for the future and how to improve general jurisprudence?
Yeah, I'm sympathetic to what you just said. Again, let me stress that this is not part of the paper, but I think I'm inclined to agree with you that what can be seen in the results that I presented. Yes, what is like one of the most striking results is that general jurisprudence basically doesn't engage with any literatures outside law and philosophy. It's marginally engaged with law and philosophy outside general jurisprudence, and it's not engaged at all with other discourses. So if we see this as a problem, and I'm inclined to see it as a problem, then any contemporary approaches that through naturalization or through conducting experiments or through informing general jurisprudence more by sociological research, like they would prima facie seem to be steps in the right direction to somehow moderate this most extreme effect, one of the most extreme effects that I presented, which is this very strong self-referentiality of general jurisprudence. But again, let me stress that I'm fully aware of it. That some people might say it's fine. I mean, it's fine. It's a highly specialized discourse, and what people in general jurisprudence are dealing with are actual philosophical puzzles. And I mean, if they are fine with that, who am I to judge? My main goal was to check whether some empirical assumptions that critics of general jurisprudence make can be validated, and to a large extent they can be.
We have also Bojan's comment. He's sorry because he's also writing in the chat.
Yeah, that's fine.
And I will read it, but you, I think you can see it also.
Yes. I found my way to open the chat, so now I can see all the questions.
And so you make an analogy with meta-ethics and normative ethics. It is, however, not common that meta-ethical positions influence positions in normative ethics. In this sense, it could be that this is the same like with general jurisprudence and normative jurisprudence. How do you think that general jurisprudence could point itself relevant again based on this research?
Thanks, Bojan. This is the first part of your question. It's not the first time I hear it. So I think there is something to it. So that wasn't exactly my point. This is something that Davidenov explicitly says in his paper. And there is a sentence, I think I don't cite it explicitly in the slides, but he says, meta-ethics makes a difference or matters. So I think he says makes a difference to one's position in normative ethics. And who made that statement? Who made that comment to me for the first time was not a legal philosopher, but actually a moral philosopher, who told me, "Do you really think that if I am a cognitivist, it really matters for my position on the morality of abortion?" Yeah, that's right. Perhaps not. So yeah, perhaps I should qualify this argument, even if it's not my argument, but an argument from Enoch in this case. Maybe we shouldn't trust philosophers on their word like this. So yeah. Again, the second part of Bojan's question. I'm wondering how it relates to the first part of Bojan's question, because as I understand the first part of Bojan's question is that, yeah, it's fine. Meta-ethics and normative ethics, they are largely independent from each other. So perhaps it's the same about general jurisprudence and the rest of legal scholarship. So if that is fine, then perhaps there is no reason for general jurisprudence paint itself relevant again, because like the situation in which we are now seems to be fine to everyone. Like nobody in legal scholarship cares much about current general jurisprudence, and I don't know if people in general jurisprudence really have this ambition of making an impact and of being relevant to legal scholarship. Perhaps in some areas of it. For example, let me mention that general jurisprudence, as identified in a community in this study, for example, it includes much of the theory of legal interpretation, which was quite an interesting result to my mind. And I can imagine people in vertical legal interpretation would like to have an impact of how laws are interpreted. But people focusing on analyzing legal normativity or rules or the separation of law and morality, yeah, maybe they don't. I don't know. We would need to. They would like to be relevant, and if they would like to do something to be relevant to other discourses. Again, I'm perfectly fine with the situation in which they are engaged in solving something that are actual theoretical puzzles, even without direct relevance to other disciplines. That's fine. This is basic research. This is much of philosophy. Well, it's something else, right? Sorry, not related. Just in line because of format. I think they should have an ambition. Yeah, I think I agree. But again, I would like to remain agnostic on that point.
But maybe, can you compare? So at the beginning of your presentation, you said that philosophy of science is well cited in other disciplines.
Yeah.
So what do you think, how they made it through and how they reached other disciplines? And maybe there can be drawn some conclusions from their way of writing, researching, which can be, I don't know, a good way for general jurisprudence to go in that direction.
Yeah. So actually, I would be more inclined to compare philosophy of science. Like I was trying in the beginning of this presentation to draw this analogy between, let's say, metaphysics, epistemology, philosophy of language, as opposed to philosophy of science in this more general philosophical area, and to postulate that a similar relation is between general jurisprudence and more specialized areas of philosophy of law. So what I get from my results is that those more specialized areas of philosophy of law are actually cited, are read by legal scholars. So, for example, yeah, I should have perhaps mentioned it more explicitly, but you have those, for example, this cluster called Judicial Review and Constitutional Rights. It is extremely well cited by legal scholarship. There is, I don't know, a cluster called Legal Reasoning. It is cited in legal scholarship. It is also actually cited in computer science. It is cited by many other disciplines that we wouldn't guess at first. And so on and so forth. The same applies to many other communities. So I don't know if there's a solution. Maybe that's the way it is, that there is that in any kind of philosophical reflection, there is this core that grows increasingly inaccessible to outsiders. And there are those peripheries that engage more with mundane, but somehow interesting at the same time, everyday questions. And because of that, there is some interaction with, in this case, legal scholarship. Maybe it is the case that in the end, this core of general jurisprudence indirectly has an impact because it somehow affects, hopefully, that would be a very charitable interpretation of this pattern of results, that since general jurisprudence is read by other legal philosophers, it has some impact on their scholarship. And since those more peripheral areas have impact on legal scholarship, then general jurisprudence have an indirect effect. I don't know how it could be studied, if there is a way to study it systematically, but this might be a plausible hypothesis.
Yes, that is interesting. Do we have any other questions? Jules, maybe?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your presentation. I found it really interesting, your approach in the sense of trying to debunk or not these claims that they were doing at the beginning. My first comment would be going back to something that you already discussed when you answered the first of Sava's question. I understand that your work is mainly descriptive, but I think that one of the main issues about citations is the definition in itself of general jurisprudence. Because a majority of people that are trying to, so general jurisprudence hasn't have, at least from what I know, a clear definition. Like part of the search for what general jurisprudence is, this term in English as well, because you can have like general theory of law, for example, and you don't know whether they are the same or not. So, for example, continental philosophers, in the sense of philosophers coming from the outside Anglo-Saxon world, are going to refer as general theory of law instead of general jurisprudence, blah, blah. And then this association with legal philosophy. I think that even if you are not going to take a position on that, for the analysis that you want to do, you might need to first do this type of analysis, descriptive analysis, and then go into the citation analysis. This is just one comment, because I think that some of the results are based on these problems that within the philosophy of law realm, they are still ongoing, that there are discussions about what general jurisprudence is and if it can be, what are the limits, and then this is just my first comment. My second comment would be something that is not related in itself to the methodology, but something that so just to think about, which is also related to your finding that if they are going to cite something, they are going to cite older books. I think that maybe what is happening is that academia has changed, and then the trend of academia is going towards is hyper-specialization, and the way in which people arrive to have jobs is through hyper-specialization, which was not the case in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, where the older books on general jurisprudence in a wide sense were written. So these authors were really mainly concerned with trying to build the general theory of the thing because they could, because their jobs allowed them, and the type of academia that was going on in that moment, I think that it was basically it tended to that in some sense. So this is something, question mark, do you think that this could be a plausible reading about your findings in this sense?
Yeah, no, I love it. Sure.
So sorry.
No, because I thought you were done with your question, but if you have anything to ask, go ahead.
Yes. Two other things. I think that in some sense, the type of, I feel, I cannot really say in the sense of I cannot demonstrate my feeling, but I think your findings are biased, but not your findings in your, like, that your methodology is biased. But I think, or I feel that what you found is too Anglo-Saxon, in the sense of coming absolutely from outside the Anglo-Saxon world. I was absolutely flabbergasted by your findings, and then I absolutely know that there is something like going absolutely outside the things that you have consulted that clearly does not relate to your findings. So this was a question mark. And the other thing is that sometimes I think the citations do not always show the influences.
Yeah.
Which is something that I have seen. For example, in the Anglo-Saxon world, the majority of the people do not cite. So you have, especially older books, you have a book with no quotations, no citations whatsoever. The citation thing, I think it is very modern, especially in the Anglo-Saxon world. So maybe also that you have something to maybe analyze. Well, thank you for the patience.
No, these are all wonderful questions. I like them all a lot. So starting from the end, of course, yeah, that's, you pointed very precisely to an important limitation of any citation analysis, namely that we must have some implausible assumptions, that citing something, first, that citing something shows some actual engagement with that work. And second, this is also a very good point, that the patterns of citation are relatively stable across disciplines, across areas of research, and across time. And this might be not the case. I absolutely agree. I'm trying to, I really like this comment about the instability of citation patterns across time. And I'm thinking what the impact of this fact could be to my results. I'm not sure at the moment, but I can imagine that perhaps there is some channel through which it might introduce some bias. Because what I discuss more explicitly in the paper is this limitation of not being sure what function citations exactly serve, because there's much methodological literature on that in bibliometrics, and of course there are many functions. But the worst part is when a citation is purely perfunctory. It's not evidence of any actual engagement with the cited item. You just cite something, you just cite the concept of law, because it's nice to cite the concept of law. It shows some engagement with, you are a tax legal scholar and you want to show that you know philosophy, so you would say the concept of law. So this is something I discuss in the paper, but of course I don't address it in any systematic way, this limitation, because it indeed could pump some older books in general jurisprudence. It is possible that people are just used to cite parts and Dworkin and Fuller together, and this inflates their centrality in the entire network. It is possible, but actually the way to address it, the only way I'm aware of to address it, would be actually to qualitatively analyze citations, or at least some sample of citations, to determine to what extent we can assume that citing, let's say, general jurisprudence shows some actual engagement. But again, thank you for pointing another potential limitations that I think might be a really valid limitation. What was your third question?
I forgot.
Fragmentation.
Sorry?
Fragmentation of legal of fields of studies.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, let's assume it was the second or the third one, but I liked it a lot. So this idea that there are some institution. Sorry, is somebody?
Yes.
I think that someone has their microphone on, but
yeah,
accidentally. I think it's okay.
Okay, so yeah, that was a great suggestion, that there are some institutional factors at play and changing incentives. And I think that I agree with it, that incentives have changed, and that, yeah, you're right. At some point, scholars could write those books on general theories of whatnot, and they were good books, and they were accessible books, and people until today like reading them. While today, the incentives are different. We are expected to publish as much as possible, and we end up publishing a lot of short polemics with each other. So like somehow there are institutional factors to specialize within those tiny communities of scholars who perhaps keep talking just to each other. Yeah, I think that there might be much truth to this explanation, and I think it's an very important factor for sure. Then what was the second question? It was good too.
Don't you worry. Then we go back to the recording, and then we see. Oh, that was the question.
Okay, I will post.
Thank you very much for your answers.
Thanks.
But I think that like the first one was about, again, distinction between general jurisprudence and other areas of legal philosophy.
Yeah, so I just remembered the second question, because now I remember that it was about the centrality of Anglophone texts. And then we can go to the first question, because that one I didn't fully understand, but this one is right. And I can only tell you that I put some effort into making the non-Anglophone voices being heard by starting this study with this collection of 18 or 19 academic journals, the majority of which were non-Anglophone. But in the end, it didn't help. And as I said, the entire data set is very much, the ultimate network was very much Anglophone. And, you know, I'm not sure if it represents anything in the world, or if it's an artifact of some features of the data set that I'm using, that for some reason, which is quite possible, that the coverage of the completeness of data for non-Anglophone journals would be poorer than for Anglophone journals, for example. Which is highly likely because, of course, the entire all the algorithms for extracting citations, of course, they're primarily constructed with English in mind, and they are tested, fine-tuned, and whatnot on English texts. So it is quite possible that simply citation data for texts non-English are worse, because like the entire also bibliometrics in general and methods used in bibliometrics are so much developed with literature in English in mind. But of course, there is still some possibility that this pattern reflects something in the actual world. For example, that for sure there are important local discourses in legal philosophy, not in English, but the big, and I have no idea if that's the case. I think that might be not the case, but theoretically it's possible that the big, you know, worldwide universal discourse in legal philosophy is conducted in English. And like all other discourses are local and tiny, and for that reason they don't pop up that much in this analysis. But I think this is not right, because of course there are massive discourses in legal philosophy in Spanish, for example, and perhaps that would be for that reason, or in Italian, or in Polish for that matter. So for that reason, I think we shouldn't read too much from those patterns. And indeed, there is some bias in this analysis. I'm not sure where exactly, but some bias which results in it being too much focused on legal philosophy in English. And I don't claim that one should draw any strong conclusions from that. So then your first questions, that one I didn't really get. So if you want to revisit it and
no, but basically it's very small. I think that going back to Sava's question, I think that you should, before going into this citation analysis,
right,
you should do an analysis about what is the perception about what general jurisprudence is.
Yeah.
Not taking you a position about that, but then know what the people that are engaging or not in general jurisprudence think that general jurisprudence is, because the limits of general jurisprudence are something that is part of the discussion.
Yeah, no, this is a good suggestion. And actually, I also got a similar suggestion from Liz Fisher when she rejected my paper at OJL, I guess. She also said that, because now I discuss, in the preprint, I discuss different definitions of general jurisprudence in a footnote. And I think that it's not the right approach. In a paper like this, there should be a separate subsection, which is a survey of positions in the literature. Yeah, thanks for that. I think you're right.
Yeah, Sava says, thanks, Piotr. Hope to meet you in person soon.
Likewise.
Yes, every year we are organizing Belgrade Legal Philosophy Week, so maybe 2024 will be the year when you will come to Belgrade and present some results.
I would love to.
Yes, but we are still working on the topic, and you will be informed. You will be informed about this year's topic, because the previous one was about artificial intelligence and philosophy of law. And with this, I will finish this meeting. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for this interesting discussion. We are looking forward to the new version of the paper, and to be published soon in some journal. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the great discussion. I enjoyed it a lot.
And yeah, see you soon.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. How do I leave it?
Yeah.
Sorry,
We're
I'm
stuck
lost.
here. Here is Anna. Anna, now is over. Okay, I
really can't close it. You need to kick me out.
Yes, I will do that. So I will end the meeting for all of you, and see you soon.
See you. Thanks.